The first thing people heard was never the man. It was the horse. Long before anyone saw him, the steady rhythm of hoofbeats would drift across the valley, slow, unhurried, impossible to mistake. The moment those hoofbeats reached our town, something remarkable happened. Mothers quietly gathered their children. Shopkeepers stopped serving customers. Windows opened just enough for frightened eyes to watch unseen. Conversations ended mid-sentence. Nobody shouted. Nobody gave orders. The town simply knew he was coming. Then, through the morning mist, he appeared, mounted upon the most magnificent white stallion anyone had ever seen. Tall, powerfully built, broad shoulders shaped by years of honest labor, dark curls rested effortlessly upon his forehead. A neatly kept beard framed a face so striking, people often found themselves staring before remembering they were supposed to be afraid. His eyes were calm, steady, unreadable, not cruel, not angry, simply quiet. No one called him by his real name anymore. Perhaps they had forgotten it. Perhaps legends no longer needed names. To everyone in our town, he was simply the Quiet Man. Nobody knew where he lived. Nobody knew how he earned his living. Nobody had ever crossed the wooden gate, hidden deep beyond the forest, where people believed his house stood, and nobody was brave enough to try. The stories had become too large. Some said he had never entered a church. Others swore he had never smiled. Many believed he hated women. In fact, there wasn't a single young woman in town who hadn't secretly hoped to be the first to make him look her way. None succeeded. Not once. The baker's daughter waited for him every second Saturday. He greeted her politely, bought his bread, mounted his horse, and left. The mayor's niece, the most admired young woman in 3 neighboring towns, accidentally dropped her handkerchief in front of him. Daniel quietly picked it up, placed it beside her, never once lifting his eyes to meet hers. He wished her a pleasant morning and continued walking. By sunset, the entire town had only one explanation. He hates women. The rumor spread, the way rumors always do, quietly, patiently, until one day, it no longer sounded like gossip. It sounded like truth, and somehow, every misfortune found its way back to him. A farmer's goats disappeared. The Quiet Man. The blacksmith's tools were stolen. The Quiet Man. Someone robbed the merchant on the northern road. The Quiet Man. A barn burned during the night. The Quiet Man. No witness, no evidence, no questions, only his name, repeated so often that people stopped asking whether it was true. Fear has a peculiar habit. It eventually begins calling itself common sense. Yet there was one thing no rumor could explain. Every harvest festival, the strongest men from neighboring towns gathered to compete. Horse racing, archery, woodcutting, wrestling. Daniel entered every competition. Daniel won every competition, without exception. Yet after every victory, he refused the prize. He thanked the judges, mounted his white horse, and quietly disappeared into the forest before the applause had even begun. Some called it pride, others called it arrogance. No one ever considered there might be another reason. Not once, not far from our town, lived another soul who understood what it meant to carry a reputation she had never earned. Her name was Gifty. She lost both her parents before she was old enough to remember their voices. The woman who raised her, Lucy, her stepmother, never allowed her to forget that she wasn't her own child. Lucy had two daughters. Agatha, the eldest, beautiful, proud, and convinced life existed to serve her. Then there was Allie, the younger sister. She wasn't cruel by nature. She simply laughed whenever Agatha laughed, even when she didn't understand why. Together, they turned one small house into a place no child should ever have called home. Every morning before sunrise, Gifty carried water, collected firewood, cooked breakfast, washed clothes, swept floors, worked until her hands blistered. Yet somehow, there was always another reason why she wasn't good enough. If breakfast was late, it was Gifty's fault. If rain spoiled the washing, it was Gifty's fault. If Lucy misplaced a needle, it somehow became Gifty's fault. The strange thing about blame is that once people decide you deserve it, they stop looking for the truth. Gifty never argued. She simply smiled, not because she was happy, because sometimes a smile is the only place left to hide your tears. She had no idea that before another sunrise, her entire life was about to change forever. Morning arrived, just as it always did, before the birds, before the sun, before anyone else opened their eyes. Gifty was already awake. She quietly folded the thin blanket she slept on, rolled up the woven mat beneath her, and stepped barefoot onto the cold floor. The little storage room, where Lucy had made her sleep, was barely large enough for one person. A tiny window near the ceiling allowed only a ribbon of morning light to enter each day. It was enough. Gifty had learned long ago that hope doesn't need much room to survive. She quietly picked up 2 empty buckets and began the long walk to the river. By the time she returned, Lucy was already standing outside, hands folded, waiting, not to greet her, to inspect her. She looked at the buckets, then at Gifty. Without warning, she dipped one finger into the water. She frowned. Too much sand. Before Gifty could answer, Lucy threw the entire bucket onto the ground. Water soaked the dusty earth. Go again. Gifty quietly picked up the empty bucket. She didn't argue. She simply turned and began walking back toward the river. Agatha watched from the doorway, laughing. Maybe next time, she called out, bring the whole river with you. Allie laughed too, not because it was funny, because Agatha had. When Gifty returned the second time, Lucy said nothing. She simply pointed toward the washing, then the cooking, then the firewood, then the floor. There was always another task, always another reason to remind Gifty that she belonged nowhere. Yet something about today felt different. Lucy had changed into her best dress. Agatha had braided her hair. Even Allie, who usually cared about nothing, kept running to the front window, looking down the road, waiting. Gifty noticed. She didn't ask why. She had learned that answers rarely belonged to her. Just before noon, someone knocked. 3 slow knocks. Lucy smiled, a real smile, the kind Gifty had never seen directed toward herself. She hurried to open the door. Standing outside was an elderly man. His hair was silver. His hands trembled against an old walking stick, yet his clothes were expensive, very expensive. Lucy welcomed him as though a king had arrived. Fresh tea, fresh bread, honey, the best chair in the house. Agatha quickly served the table. Allie giggled nervously. Lucy looked toward the kitchen. Gifty, come here. Gifty quietly stepped inside. Lucy didn't introduce her as a daughter. She didn't even introduce her as family. She simply looked at the old man and said, "This is the girl." The old man slowly stood, walked around Gifty, studying her, not her face, her hands, her shoulders, her posture, as though deciding whether she was worth the price. Gifty lowered her eyes. She had never felt less human. Lucy smiled proudly. She wakes before sunrise. She cooks. She cleans. She never complains. The old man nodded, then reached into his coat. He placed a small leather pouch, filled with coins, onto the table. The sound echoed through the room. Lucy never looked at Gifty. She looked only at the money, then quietly said, the sentence that would stay with Gifty for the rest of her life. Tomorrow, long pause. She belongs to you. Silence. Then, Agatha burst into laughter. She leaned toward Allie. Imagine waking up and calling your husband grandfather. Both sisters laughed uncontrollably. Even the old man smiled. Only Lucy remained calm, as though this was simply good business. Gifty looked around the room. She waited, just for a second. She waited for someone, anyone, to say, enough. Nobody did, because nobody intended to. That evening, Lucy handed Gifty a carefully folded cream-colored dress, the most beautiful dress she had ever touched. For one impossible moment, Gifty thought, perhaps she had misunderstood. Perhaps tomorrow was something else. Lucy looked at her, then smiled, coldly. Don't stain it. It's the finest thing anyone has ever bought for you. Those words hurt more than the marriage itself. Bought, not given. Bought. Dinner came, as always. Gifty waited. Lucy served herself, then Agatha, then Allie, then the old man. Only after everyone had finished did Lucy place one small piece of stale bread on the table. Nothing else. Gifty picked it up quietly, walked outside. The old brown dog slowly stood. Its tired tail wagged gently. She broke the bread into 2 pieces, placed the larger half before him, then smiled. At least, she whispered, today someone is happy to see me. The old dog rested his head against her hand. Gifty closed her eyes. She couldn't remember the last time she had been touched with affection. That night, she didn't sleep. She simply watched the moon through the tiny window until the stars began fading. Then, very quietly, she stood. She didn't pack clothes. She didn't take food. She didn't even take the beautiful dress. Some things weren't worth carrying if they cost you your freedom. She opened the back door. The old dog was already waiting, as though he somehow knew. She knelt beside him, wrapped her arms around his neck. A single tear finally escaped. If I stay, she whispered, I'll disappear. She kissed his forehead, stood, looked once toward the little house where she had spent years trying to earn love that was never hers. Then, without another word, Gifty ran. She didn't know where she was going. She only knew where she could never return. Gifty ran until she could no longer hear the laughter. She ran until Lucy's little house had disappeared behind the trees. She ran until the road beneath her feet became nothing more than a narrow path through the forest. Still, she didn't stop, because sometimes the place behind you is far more frightening than the place ahead. The morning sun slowly climbed above the hills. Birds filled the air with song, but Gifty heard none of it. Her heart was pounding too loudly. Every snapping branch made her look behind. Every gust of wind sounded like footsteps. She imagined Lucy sending men after her. She imagined the old man waiting. She imagined being dragged home, forced into the cream-colored dress, and married before sunset. No, she whispered to herself, not today, not ever. Hours passed. The forest grew deeper. The path became thinner. Soon, there was no path at all, only towering trees, their branches stretching toward one another until they almost hid the sky. Her feet ached. Tiny cuts covered her ankles. Her dress had torn against thorn bushes she hadn't eaten since the small piece of stale bread she had shared with the old dog. She finally stopped beside a great oak tree. Leaning against its rough bark, she slowly slid to the ground. She closed her eyes. For the first time since leaving Lucy's house, she allowed herself to cry, not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, the kind of tears that have waited for years. When the tears finally stopped, she looked toward the sky. The clouds were gathering. Rain, she smiled sadly. Even the heavens, she whispered, have somewhere to go. Then she bowed her head. For a long moment, she couldn't find the words. Finally, she prayed, Lord, a long silence. If you still know my name, another silence. Please don't let them find me. The wind answered, nothing else. She stood again, took another step, then another. A few minutes later, she stopped so suddenly, she almost lost her balance. There, through the trees, was a light, warm, golden, steady. She frowned. No one lived this deep in the forest. At least, no one was supposed to. Curiosity slowly overcame exhaustion. She walked closer. The trees began to thin, and then she saw it. Not a cabin, not a shack, a beautiful wooden home, white walls, dark timber beams, a wide front porch, flower boxes overflowing with color. Roses climbed the fence. Lavender swayed gently beside the pathway. Bird feeders hung from the branches of enormous trees. Butterflies floated lazily through the garden. Someone had cared for every inch of this place. Someone had loved it. Gifty stood frozen. Her heart whispered one thing. The stories whispered another. There was only one house anywhere near this part of the forest. Only one. And everyone knew who lived there. Daniel, the quiet man. Her breathing became shallow. She remembered every warning. Don't ever go near his land. If he sees you, run. She looked at the flowers again, then quietly said, almost without thinking, monsters. She swallowed. Don't grow flowers. The words lingered in the air. Then, a twig snapped behind her. She turned so quickly, her breath caught in her throat. Standing only a few steps away was the largest German shepherd she had ever seen. Its coat shimmered beneath the afternoon light. Its golden eyes rested calmly upon her. It didn't bark. It didn't growl. It simply watched. Gifty couldn't move. Every story she had ever heard returned all at once. Her knees became weak. She slowly closed her eyes, folded her trembling hands, and whispered, if this is the end. A tear rolled down her face. Thank you, her voice broke, for letting me die free. Silence. No growl, no attack, only the soft sound of a tail brushing against the grass. She slowly opened one eye. The great shepherd was sitting, looking at her, almost patiently, almost kindly. It stood, turned toward the house, walked a few steps, stopped, then looked back, waiting, not commanding, not threatening, waiting. Gifty stared. For the first time in years, someone wasn't chasing her. Someone was waiting for her. She took a slow breath, opened the little wooden gate, and stepped inside. She had no idea that beyond that front door waited the one man who would change everything she believed about fear, about kindness, and about home. Gifty stood motionless. The great German shepherd waited beside her. Neither of them seemed willing to take the first step. The afternoon breeze carried the scent of roses and freshly cut grass. Everything about this place felt strangely peaceful. Nothing resembled the stories. The dog turned once more, walked toward the front porch, then stopped beside the wooden door. It looked back, waiting. Gifty slowly followed. Every heartbeat felt louder than the last. She stood before the door. For one brief moment, she almost turned around. Perhaps the stories were true after all. Perhaps this was the last mistake she would ever make. Then the door opened, not suddenly, not dramatically, quietly. Standing in the doorway was the man the whole town feared. He was taller than she imagined, broad shoulders, strong hands, dark curls, a neatly kept beard, simple work clothes, no expensive coat, no polished boots, nothing about him looked like a man chasing power. He carried a wooden bucket filled with warm water. Over one arm rested neatly folded towels. In his other hand, a small basket of freshly picked herbs. He stopped. His eyes met Gifty's. Neither of them spoke. His eyes slowly moved downward, her feet bare, bruised, bleeding. Then her trembling hands, her torn dress, the dried tears upon her face. He noticed everything. Still, he asked nothing. Finally, his quiet voice broke the silence. "You're hurt." Not an accusation, not a question, simply an observation. Gifty opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Daniel nodded gently, almost as though he understood. He stepped aside, leaving the doorway completely open, not inviting her, not forcing her, simply making room. The choice was hers. For several seconds, neither of them moved. Then the old shepherd quietly walked inside. Daniel followed, without looking back, as though trusting she would decide for herself. Gifty looked once toward the forest, then toward the open door. Slowly, she stepped inside. The house was warm, not because of the fire, because someone had filled it with care. Books lined the shelves, fresh bread rested on the kitchen table. A violin leaned quietly beside the fireplace. Wooden birds, each carved by hand, stood upon windowsills. Sunlight poured through lace curtains. Fresh flowers rested in simple clay jars. It didn't feel like the home of a monster. It felt like someone's sanctuary. Then she heard it, a gentle cough from another room. Daniel quietly placed the bucket upon the floor, picked up the basket of herbs, then disappeared down the hallway. Gifty hesitated. Curiosity quietly overcame fear. She followed. The bedroom door remained slightly open. She stopped. Inside, an elderly woman rested peacefully upon a small wooden bed. Her silver hair framed a gentle face. She looked tired, very tired. Daniel knelt beside her. He dipped a cloth into the warm water, carefully washed her hands, then gently adjusted the blanket around her shoulders, not hurried, not burdened, patiently, as though he had done this 1,000 times. The old woman opened her eyes. A warm smile spread across her face. "Daniel," she whispered, "you're late today." Daniel smiled, a smile so quiet, it almost disappeared before it arrived. "I met someone," he replied softly. The old woman looked toward the doorway. Her eyes found Gifty immediately. She smiled again, the kind of smile only mothers know how to give. "Come closer, child." Gifty hesitated. Daniel simply nodded. She slowly entered. The old woman reached for her hand. Her fingers were thin, weak, but wonderfully warm. "I'm Miriam," she said, "Daniel's mother." Gifty looked at Daniel, then back at Miriam. She couldn't understand. This was the man the town had feared for 20 years. The man who spent his afternoons washing his mother's hands. As Daniel prepared a small cup of herbal tea, Gifty quietly watched. Then something caught her attention. The herbs. She recognized them immediately. She remembered her own mother teaching her something many years ago. Very softly, almost afraid to interrupt, she spoke. "Those herbs." Daniel looked up. "May I?" She paused. "Show you something?" For the first time, Daniel looked surprised. He studied her face, not with suspicion, with curiosity. Then, without saying a word, he handed her the herbs. Daniel looked at Gifty, then quietly placed the basket of herbs into her hands. It was a simple gesture. But for Daniel, it was not a small thing. For years, he had learned to trust only himself. Now, without fully understanding why, he had trusted a stranger. Gifty carefully spread the herbs across the kitchen table. She smiled softly. These weren't wrong. They were simply unfinished. She picked up a few fresh leaves from the windowsill, then reached for a small piece of ginger. Daniel watched silently. Every movement was calm, certain, almost familiar. She crushed the leaves gently between her fingers. The room slowly filled with a sweet, earthy fragrance. Miriam smiled from her chair. Without opening her eyes, she whispered, "That smells like home." Gifty stopped. Nobody had ever described something she had made that way. She looked toward Miriam. The old woman smiled again. "My mother," she whispered, "used to make that." Gifty's eyes widened. "So did mine," she answered quietly. For a brief moment, 3 people from completely different lives were connected by one forgotten memory. Daniel carefully carried the warm cup to his mother. Miriam took a slow sip, then another. She closed her eyes, not because she was tired, because she was remembering. A few moments later, she reached for Gifty's hand. "Thank you, child." Simple words, yet somehow they reached places inside Gifty's heart that had been empty for years. Nobody had thanked her before, not for cooking, not for cleaning, not for carrying water, not simply for being kind. The days passed quietly. Mornings became peaceful. Daniel tended the garden. Gifty prepared meals. Together, they cared for Miriam. Some days, she was stronger. Other days, she barely had enough strength to sit beside the window. On the difficult days, Daniel never complained. He simply sat beside her, read aloud from old books, played gentle melodies on the violin, or quietly held her hand until she fell asleep. Gifty watched all of it, sometimes from the kitchen doorway, sometimes from the garden. The stories she had grown up believing became harder to recognize. She had never met a cruel man who spoke so gently to his mother. One afternoon, while Daniel repaired a broken fence, Gifty wandered into the small workshop behind the house. She stopped. The moment she entered, every wall was covered with carvings, birds, deer, children laughing, old hands folded in prayer, trees dancing in the wind. Every piece seemed alive. On a workbench lay an unfinished carving. She gently picked it up. It was the face of an elderly woman, soft eyes, a peaceful smile. Miriam. Daniel had captured every wrinkle with astonishing tenderness. She didn't hear him approach. "She's beautiful," she whispered. Daniel looked at the carving. then toward his mother, sleeping peacefully beneath the old oak tree. A quiet smile crossed his face. She has always been beautiful. No hesitation, no embarrassment, just truth. Gifty slowly looked around the workshop again. "Did you make all of these?" Daniel nodded. "Mostly during the nights," he replied, "when Mother couldn't sleep." Gifty ran her fingers gently across one tiny wooden bird. "The whole town," she said quietly, "has no idea." Daniel continued sanding the carving. "Without looking up," he answered. "People usually see." He paused. The sound of the carving knife filled the room. "What they've already decided to believe." The words lingered. Neither of them spoke again, because neither of them needed to. That evening, Miriam watched them from the porch. Daniel was teaching Gifty how to hold the carving knife safely. She laughed after making her first crooked line. Daniel quietly smiled, then showed her again. Miriam closed her eyes. A gentle breeze moved through the trees. She whispered, almost too softly to hear, "Thank you for sending him a friend." Daniel didn't hear her. Gifty didn't hear her. Only the wind carried the words into the evening sky. As the sun disappeared behind the forest, the old German shepherd stretched lazily at Daniel's feet. Birds settled into the trees. The little house, which had known so much silence, was beginning to sound like laughter again. Not loud laughter, quiet laughter, the kind that heals. In the morning, while Daniel was away in the garden, Miriam quietly asked Gifty, "Has Daniel told you why he lives here?" Gifty shook her head. "No." Miriam smiled. She looked out toward the garden. Daniel was watering the newly planted flowers. The German shepherd slept beside him. Birds hopped fearlessly around his feet. The old woman's eyes filled with quiet pride. "When his father died," she whispered, "Daniel was only 24. She paused, almost remembering. "He had dreams. Big dreams. He wanted to study art, travel, see the world." Another pause. "Then I became sick." Silence. The brush continued moving gently through her hair. "He sold everything. His father's tools, his horse saddle, even the little piece of land his father left him." Gifty moved closer to her. Miriam gently placed her hand over Gifty's. "He never told me." A small smile appeared. "I found out later." Outside, Daniel was repairing a broken birdhouse. He had no idea his story was being told. Miriam continued. "People think," she smiled sadly, "he stays away from town because he hates people." She slowly shook her head. "The truth," long silence, "is that one day he became too tired to defend himself." Gifty lowered her eyes. Those words felt painfully familiar. That evening, while Daniel prepared supper, Gifty walked quietly around the family room. She looked around, the carvings and portraits. She suddenly realized every beautiful thing in the room had been created by a man the whole town feared. She whispered to herself, almost in disbelief, "How lonely you must have been." She didn't realize Daniel was standing just outside the door. He heard every word. He didn't interrupt. He simply stood there for a long moment, then quietly walked away. Not because he was embarrassed, because no one had ever understood without asking. Some wounds heal quietly, so quietly that one morning you wake up and realize you smiled without thinking. That was how healing came to the little house beyond the forest, not all at once, one ordinary day at a time. The mornings became familiar. Daniel watered the flowers before sunrise. Gifty prepared breakfast with Miriam. The old German shepherd followed whoever happened to be working. Sometimes Daniel whistled softly. Within moments, birds appeared from every corner of the garden. They landed on fences, tree branches, even the porch railing. Gifty watched in amazement. "They know you," Daniel smiled. Without looking up, he answered, "No." A robin landed beside him. He scattered a handful of seeds. "They simply learned." He looked toward the little bird. "I would never hurt them." Gifty quietly lowered her eyes. Somehow, those words felt much bigger than birds. That afternoon, Daniel disappeared into the workshop. Gifty had become curious about that little building. Every evening, he emerged covered in sawdust, smelling of cedar and pine. One day, she finally gathered enough courage. She knocked gently. The door slowly opened. Daniel stood there. Wood shavings rested in his curls. A thin layer of sawdust covered his shirt. He looked almost surprised to see her. "May I come in?" she asked. Daniel stepped aside. Inside, the workshop felt like another world. Wooden birds, little foxes, deer, flowers, tiny cottages, music boxes, portraits. Everything had been carved by hand. Gifty slowly turned in a circle. She whispered, almost to herself, "I didn't know." Daniel smiled faintly. "Many people don't." Her eyes stopped on a tiny, unfinished sparrow. It wasn't much bigger than the palm of her hand. She picked it up carefully. "It's beautiful." Daniel looked at it. "Not yet." She laughed softly. "You're difficult to please." For a second, Daniel looked confused. Then, the smallest smile appeared. He reached into a drawer and removed another block of cedar, along with a tiny carving knife. He placed both in front of Gifty. "Would you like to try?" She looked at him, then at the knife. "I've never carved anything." Daniel nodded. "Neither had I." A tiny smile. "Before my first carving." The first attempt was terrible. A piece broke off, then another. Soon, the little bird looked more like a potato than a sparrow. Gifty sighed dramatically. "I think," she held it up, "I've invented a completely new animal." Daniel stared at it, trying very hard not to laugh. She noticed, pointed the little carving toward him. "Go ahead. You want to laugh?" Daniel shook his head, very seriously. "No." A long pause. Then, without warning, he laughed, not loudly, not for long, just enough. A real laugh, warm, unplanned, completely genuine. The sound filled the little workshop. Gifty froze. She blinked, then began laughing too, harder than she had laughed in years. Outside, Miriam looked up from her knitting. She listened. Another laugh, then another. Her hands slowly stopped moving. Tears quietly filled her eyes. She looked toward heaven and smiled. "There you are," she whispered. "I've been waiting for that laugh." Later that evening, Daniel sat on the porch, repairing one of his carving knives. Gifty joined him, still holding her very strange-looking bird. She placed it proudly beside Daniel's perfect carvings. "Promise me something." Daniel looked at her. "Don't ever throw this away." He picked up the little carving, turned it slowly in his hands, then nodded. "I won't," she smiled. "Even though it's ugly?" Daniel looked at the little bird again, then at Gifty. His answer came quietly. "No." A gentle pause. "Because someone..." He carefully placed it on the shelf, made it with love. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The evening breeze moved softly through the trees. The old German shepherd rested his head on Gifty's foot. Somewhere above them, a robin began to sing. As the sun disappeared, Miriam called gently from inside. "Daniel?" "Yes, Mother?" A warm smile crossed her face. "It's good." She glanced toward Gifty, then back to her son. "To hear laughter in this house again." Daniel lowered his eyes. He didn't answer. He couldn't. Because for the first time since his father's death, the house no longer felt empty. And for the first time since losing her parents, Gifty wasn't counting the day until she had to leave. Neither of them had noticed it yet, but somewhere between a badly carved bird and one unexpected laugh, two lonely hearts had quietly begun to find their way where they belong. A few days later, Miriam's coughing returned, stronger this time. She struggled to breathe. Daniel immediately knelt beside her. Gifty prepared the herbs, but this time they weren't enough. Daniel looked at the little jar, then slowly closed the lid. His face remained calm, but Gifty noticed something she had never seen before. Fear, not fear for himself, fear of losing the only family he had left. After helping Miriam back to sleep, Daniel quietly walked onto the porch. He stood there, looking toward the distant hills. For a long time, he didn't move. Gifty stepped outside. She didn't ask questions. She simply stood beside him. The evening breeze moved gently through the trees. Finally, Daniel spoke, almost to himself. "She needs medicine." Long pause. "I can't make here." Gifty looked toward him. He continued watching the horizon. "There's a physician in the next town." Another pause. "I haven't been there." He smiled faintly. "In years." Gifty understood immediately. He wasn't afraid of the journey. He was afraid of the people. She looked toward the white horse, grazing peacefully beneath the trees. Then, quietly said, "Then," she smiled gently, "let's go together." Daniel looked at her. For the first time, he saw something he hadn't expected to find. Not pity, not curiosity, courage, and somehow, for the first time in many years, the journey back to town won't feel quite so lonely. With gentle care, Gifty crafted a new herbal medicine, making sure Miriam would remain comfortable and at ease for the rest of the evening. The following morning, the little house stirred earlier than usual. Miriam had slept peacefully through the night. The new medicine had begun doing what hope alone could not. Daniel quietly folded her blanket, adjusted the pillow behind her back, then smiled. "You look stronger today." Miriam smiled back. "I feel stronger." She looked toward Gifty, who was arranging fresh flowers beside the window. Then she looked back at Daniel. There was something in her eyes, something only mothers ever seem to notice. Outside, the white stallion stood waiting. Its silver mane moved gently in the morning breeze. Daniel tightened the saddle, checked the reins, then reached into one saddlebag. Inside rested a small wrapped parcel. Gifty noticed. "What's that?" Daniel smiled. "A surprise." She laughed. "You have surprises." He looked genuinely confused. "Am I not allowed?" She laughed again. Daniel smiled, just a little. It was becoming easier now. Before leaving, Miriam called softly, "Daniel." He stepped back inside. She reached for his hand, then looked toward Gifty. "Take care of each other." Daniel nodded. Gifty smiled. Neither of them realized how deeply those words would stay with them. Daniel mounted the horse, then looked down. As always, he quietly extended his hand. This time, Gifty didn't hesitate. She placed her hand in his. Daniel gently lifted her onto the horse behind him. As she settled herself, The horse shifted slightly. Gifty lost her balance. Without thinking, she instinctively wrapped one arm around Daniel to steady herself. Both of them froze. Only for a moment, Daniel looked down at the hand resting lightly against his shoulder. Gifty quickly let go. "I'm sorry." Daniel looked ahead again. A faint smile crossed his face. "You don't have to apologize." He adjusted the reins. "For trying not to fall." She smiled, quietly relieved. The horse began walking, not hurried, not slow, simply steady. The forest welcomed them. Golden sunlight filtered through the trees. Birds danced overhead. The old German shepherd trotted faithfully behind, refusing to be left behind. Halfway down the trail, Daniel slowed the horse. They reached a hill overlooking the valley. The view stretched endlessly. Gifty had never seen anything so beautiful. She whispered, "I never knew the world could look like this." Daniel looked across the hills, then quietly answered, "Sometimes." A gentle breeze passed between them. "You have to leave the place." He smiled. "That broke your heart." Another pause. "Before you can see how beautiful the world really is." Gifty didn't answer. She simply looked at him. Those words weren't only about the valley. As they reached the edge of town, the familiar sound of hoofbeats echoed once again. Shopkeepers looked up. Children stopped playing. Doors opened. The entire marketplace grew quiet, exactly as it always had. But this time, something was different. Daniel wasn't alone. The first to notice was the baker's wife. She whispered, "Someone's with him." The words spread from one person to another. Soon, every eye was fixed upon the white horse, not with fear, with astonishment. Lucy stepped out of her house. Agatha followed. Then Allie. The moment Gifty came into view, Lucy dropped the basket she was carrying. Apples rolled across the dusty road. Agatha couldn't speak. Allie covered her mouth. They had prepared themselves to hear that Gifty was dead. They had never imagined she would return, looking happier than they had ever seen her. Daniel gently brought the horse to a stop. Before climbing down, he turned toward Gifty. Without saying a word, he once again offered his hand. This time, she smiled before taking it. Their eyes met, only for a second, yet somehow everyone watching noticed. Not romance, trust, the kind that cannot be pretended. Lucy slowly walked forward. Her voice trembled. "Gifty." Long silence. "Did he hurt you?" The whole town waited. Gifty looked at Daniel. He was already lifting the basket of medicine, completely unaware that every eye was watching him. She smiled, the kind of smile that only people who have finally found peace ever wear. Then she answered, "No." She took a slow breath. "He taught me." She looked toward Daniel again. "What kindness feels like." Silence. Not one person moved. Agatha stared at Daniel, then quietly whispered, "But he's the quiet man." Gifty gently shook her head. A tear escaped, though she was smiling. "No." A long pause. "His name." She looked toward him with quiet affection. "Is Daniel." For the first time, the town heard his name, spoken with love. Daniel looked around. He recognized every face, the same faces that had spent years crossing the street. When he approached, he could have spoken. He could have defended himself. He could have reminded them of every cruel rumor. Instead, he simply asked the nearest merchant, "Could you tell me where the physician is?" The merchant pointed silently. Daniel nodded. "Thank you." Then he and Gifty continued walking. leaving behind an entire town whose certainty had just begun to crumble. The journey home felt quieter, not because they had nothing to say, because some days peace speaks for itself. The white horse moved gently beneath them. The forest welcomed them once again. Sunlight filtered through the trees. For a long while, neither Daniel nor Gifty spoke. Then, Daniel suddenly slowed the horse. Ahead, an old wooden cart had tipped over. An elderly farmer struggled to lift sacks of grain that had spilled across the road. Daniel climbed down immediately, without a word. He rolled up his sleeves and began lifting the heavy sacks one by one. The old farmer looked up. His tired face brightened. "Daniel," he smiled, "you always seem to appear when people need help." Daniel chuckled softly. "Or perhaps," he replied, "people always need help." The old farmer laughed. Gifty smiled. She had never heard Daniel joke before. Together, they repaired the broken wheel, reloaded every sack before leaving. The old farmer reached into his pocket. He offered Daniel a few coins. Daniel gently closed the old man's hand. "Buy your grandchildren," he smiled, "something sweet instead." The old man shook his head. "You'll never change." Daniel only smiled, then quietly mounted the horse again. As they rode away, Gifty looked back. The farmer stood there, still smiling. Then she noticed something. The old man had never looked afraid. A little farther along the road, they stopped beside a small stream. Daniel allowed the horse to drink. Gifty gathered wildflowers. The afternoon breeze carried the scent of pine. She finally asked the question that had been quietly growing inside her heart. "Daniel." He looked toward her. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" He frowned gently. "Tell you what?" "That people love you." Daniel smiled, a sad smile. "Not everyone does." Gifty shook her head. "No." She looked toward the road, where the old farmer had disappeared. "The people who know you," long pause, "do." Daniel looked toward the water, watching it flow quietly over the stones. Then he answered, "The people who know me." A faint smile crossed his face. "Know me." Neither of them spoke again, because nothing more needed to be said. When they arrived home, Miriam was sitting on the porch, wrapped in her favorite blue shawl. The moment she saw them, she smiled. "You're late," Daniel laughed softly. "We stopped to help old Mr. Kojo." Miriam nodded knowingly. "Of course you did." She looked toward Gifty. "My son has never learned." She smiled warmly. "How to walk past someone in need." Daniel looked almost embarrassed. "Mother," Miriam laughed. "What?" "It's true." That evening, after supper, Gifty helped Miriam prepare for bed. The old woman seemed stronger. Her cheeks carried a little more color now. As Gifty brushed her silver hair, Miriam quietly asked, "Do you know why Daniel carves birds?" Gifty shook her head. "No." Miriam smiled. "When he was little," she began, "he found a robin with a broken wing. Everyone told him to leave it. They said it would die anyway." She smiled. "Daniel built that little bird a tiny wooden shelter, fed it every morning, talked to it, waited." Gifty smiled. She could almost picture it. "Did it survive?" Miriam looked toward the window, where robins still nested every spring. She smiled. "It flew away." Long pause. "But every spring, it came back." Gifty looked toward the workshop, then quietly whispered, "That's why they trust him." Miriam nodded. "Animals," she smiled gently, "are often better judges of character than people." Both women laughed softly. Later that night, Daniel sat alone inside the workshop. He wasn't carving. He was simply looking at a fresh block of cedar, thinking. A gentle knock came at the door. It was Gifty. She stepped inside, holding the little bird she had carved days earlier. She placed it carefully beside Daniel's perfect carvings, then smiled. I decided something. Daniel looked up. What? She folded her hands behind her back. I'm going to keep practicing. She looked around the workshop until one day a playful smile appeared. I carved something. That finally impresses you. Daniel looked at her little crooked bird, then back at her. He smiled, one of the warmest smiles she had ever seen. Gifty, long pause. You already have, she frowned. What do you mean? Daniel gently picked up her first little carving, the one she thought was ugly, the one he had refused to throw away. He held it carefully, as though it were priceless, then quietly said, Perfection. He looked into her eyes, has never impressed me. A gentle silence filled the workshop. Love always has. Neither of them moved, neither looked away. Outside, Miriam passed quietly by the window. She saw them, smiled, then continued walking, without interrupting. The following morning, the church bell began to ring, once, then again, then again. It didn't stop. The sound rolled across the valley, through every street, into every home. People stopped what they were doing. Farmers left their fields. Shopkeepers closed their doors. Children stopped playing. No one remembered the church bell ever ringing like this before. Something had happened, something important. Within the hour, the little church was full. Lucy sat quietly, her hands tightly folded. Agatha stared at the wooden floor. Allie looked nervously toward the front. The old blacksmith arrived, the physician, the baker, the widow, nearly the whole town. Only one seat remained empty. Daniel's. No one had invited him. The old pastor stood slowly. His Bible rested quietly upon the pulpit. He looked across the room. His eyes lingered on faces he had known for decades. Then he quietly said, There comes a day, long pause, when truth can no longer wait. Silence. No one moved. The heavy wooden doors slowly opened. Every head turned. A man entered, walking more slowly than anyone had ever seen him walk. His shoulders were bent, not with age, with guilt. He walked to the front of the church. Then, without speaking, he fell to his knees. No one helped him. No one stopped him. The silence was too heavy. Finally, his voice broke. I have lived, long pause, 20 years. His breathing trembled with another man's name. Another silence, resting on my sins. The church froze. He lifted his head. Tears covered his face. Daniel, his voice broke again, never stole from anyone. A gasp spread through the church. He continued. He never robbed the merchant. He never burned the barn. He never frightened travelers. He lowered his head. I did. Silence. Only silence. The old pastor quietly asked, Why? The man closed his eyes. Because, long pause. It was easy. He swallowed. People already feared him. Another pause. Every time I stole, I only had to whisper. His voice almost disappeared. It was the quiet man. He began crying openly, and no one ever asked another question. The old blacksmith slowly removed his cap. His weathered hands trembled. He whispered, mostly to himself, Not once did I ask Daniel if it was true. The widow covered her face. Neither did I. The baker lowered his eyes. Nor I. One by one, voices filled the little church, not accusing, confessing. I repeated the rumors. I warned my children. I crossed the road whenever I saw him. I never even spoke to him. Soon, it wasn't one confession. It became the confession of an entire town. Lucy quietly stood. Every eye turned toward her. Her voice shook. I taught Gifty. She wiped away tears. To fear the kindest man. She looked toward the floor, ashamed she would ever meet. Agatha began crying. Allie reached for her mother's hand. For the first time, none of them had excuses, only regret. The old pastor slowly closed his Bible, then looked across the congregation. His voice was gentle, but every word landed like rain on dry ground. One man, long pause, started the lie. He looked around the church, but we, another pause, kept it alive. The words settled heavily, because they were true. No one could blame only one man anymore. The lie had become everyone's responsibility, far beyond the forest. Daniel knew none of this. He was sitting beneath the great oak tree, helping Miriam thread a needle. Gifty smiled, watching them gently argue about whose eyesight had grown worse. Daniel laughed. Miriam laughed louder. Gifty laughed hardest of all. The little house was full of joy, while the town was finally discovering how much of it they had lost. Back inside the church, the old pastor spoke one final time. Today, long pause. We have confessed the truth. He looked toward the open doors. Beyond them, the forest stretched quietly toward Daniel's home. Tomorrow, another pause. We must carry that truth, his voice softened, to the man who carried our lies. No one moved, because everyone knew what tomorrow required: humility. As the church slowly emptied, not a single conversation was about the confession. Every conversation was about Daniel, not the quiet man. Daniel. For the first time in 20 years, the town had remembered his name. The following morning, the little house felt different, not because anything had changed, because everything had. The shadows no longer felt lonely. The laughter no longer felt unfamiliar. Even the old German shepherd seemed to sleep more peacefully. Sometimes he would open one eye, look toward Daniel and Gifty, then quietly go back to sleep, as though he had decided his family was finally complete. Daniel spent the morning inside the workshop. The familiar sound of carving echoed softly through the open window. Tap, slide, brush, every movement patient, every cut intentional. Gifty stood outside, watching him through the doorway. She smiled, then quietly knocked. Daniel looked up. "Come in." She stepped inside, holding another little block of cedar. She placed it proudly on the workbench. "Today," she smiled, "I'm going to carve something that actually looks like what it's supposed to be." Daniel folded his arms, trying very hard to look serious. "That would certainly be..." A tiny smile escaped. "A remarkable improvement." Gifty laughed. "You're impossible." She picked up the carving knife. "Very carefully," she began. Daniel watched quietly. For several minutes, he said nothing. Then, he slowly walked behind her. "May I?" She nodded. He gently placed his hand over hers, carefully adjusting the angle of the blade. "Don't fight the wood," he whispered. "Listen to it." His hand remained lightly over hers. Neither of them noticed how close they were standing. Outside, Miriam quietly passed the workshop window. She stopped, looked inside. Daniel was smiling, really smiling, not the polite smile the town had occasionally seen, the smile of a man who had forgotten to be lonely. Miriam placed one hand over her heart, then whispered to herself, "Thank you." She quietly walked away, leaving the moment exactly where it belonged. A few minutes later, Gifty finally finished. She held up the carving proudly. It looked slightly better than the last one. Only slightly. Daniel studied it very seriously, walking around it, examining every side. Finally, he nodded. "Well," long pause. "It's definitely," another pause, "made of wood." Gifty stared at him, then burst into laughter. She picked up a tiny curl of cedar and threw it at him. It landed squarely on his shoulder. Daniel looked down, then back at her, pretending to be shocked. "Did you just—" She laughed harder. "Maybe." Without another word, Daniel picked up an even smaller wood shaving and flicked it gently toward her. It landed in her hair. Now they were both laughing. The workshop echoed with a sound it had not heard in for many years. Outside, birds suddenly took flight from the trees, as though they too wanted to join in. That afternoon, they rode into the hills to gather cedar. The white horse walked slowly along a narrow trail overlooking the valley. Daniel climbed down first, then reached up, offering his hand, as he always did. Gifty smiled. She took it, but as she stepped down, her foot caught against the stirrup. She slipped before she could fall. Daniel caught her, one arm around her waist, the other holding her hand. Everything became still. The wind, the birds, even the horse seemed to stop moving. Neither of them spoke. Neither looked away. For one impossibly long moment, they simply stood there, looking at one another, not as strangers, not as two wounded people, but as two souls who had quietly become each other's safest place. Gifty's breathing slowed. Daniel gently released her, almost reluctantly. "Are you all right?" She smiled, unable to stop smiling. "I am now." Daniel looked away, trying very hard to hide the smile that refused to leave his face. They spent the afternoon collecting cedar branches, talking, not about the past, not about the rumors, about little things, the funniest bird Daniel had ever rescued, the terrible soup Gifty had once tried to cook, the day the German shepherd chased a butterfly and somehow lost. For the first time, Daniel wasn't surviving the day, he was enjoying it. As the sun began to set, they returned home. Miriam sat quietly on the porch, knitting, watching the road. The moment she saw them, she noticed something. Daniel climbed down first, then, without thinking, he turned and offered Gifty his hand. Not because she needed help, because he simply couldn't imagine not doing it anymore. Gifty placed her hand in his. She stepped down. Neither of them let go, not immediately. Just for one quiet moment, their hands remained together. Miriam smiled, then called out, without looking up from her knitting, "Daniel." He answered absent-mindedly. "Yes, Mother," she smiled to herself. "Are you planning," long pause, "to keep holding that poor girl's hand?" She finally looked up. Her eyes danced with mischief. "Or are you ever going to ask her?" Another pause. "To stay?" Silence. Absolute silence. Gifty's cheeks turned crimson. Daniel looked as though someone had completely stolen every word he had ever known. Miriam laughed, a warm, joyful laugh, the kind only mothers can laugh when they've just embarrassed their grown son Gifty couldn't help laughing too. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck, completely defeated. Mother, Miriam simply smiled. What? Someone had to say it. All three of them laughed together. The sound drifted across the garden, through the flowers, into the forest, and for the first time, the little house beyond the trees didn't feel like a place where people had come to hide from the world. It felt like home. The annual exhibition arrived with the first days of spring. For generations, artists, woodworkers, painters, musicians had gathered in the town square to celebrate beauty. Daniel had never attended, not once. For 20 years, he had quietly remained beyond the forest. This year, everyone secretly hoped he might come. Nobody asked. They knew Daniel well enough to know he would come, only if he wanted to. 3 days before the exhibition, Daniel disappeared into his workshop. He remained there from sunrise until long after sunset. The familiar sound of carving continued late into the night. Tap, slide, brush, tap, slide, brush. Gifty smiled every time she heard it. She wanted to look. She wanted to ask, but she didn't, because trust also knows when to wait. On the morning of the exhibition, Daniel quietly carried a large object wrapped carefully beneath a white linen cloth. No one could see what it was. He loaded it gently onto the wagon, then turned toward Gifty. "Would you do something for me?" She nodded. "Anything." He smiled softly. "Go to the exhibition." She laughed. "Only if you're coming too." Daniel looked away. The familiar quietness returned to his face. "Not today." She frowned. "Why?" Daniel gently tightened the rope, holding the covered carving in place, then quietly answered, "Some gifts," long pause, "are easier to receive." He smiled faintly. When the giver isn't watching. The town square overflowed with people. Children ran between the stalls. Music drifted through the air. Everywhere there was laughter. Near the center there stood one final display, covered by a simple white cloth. No artist's name, only a small wooden plaque. It read, "The Last Piece." Curiosity spread quickly. The mayor stepped forward. He looked around the crowd, then slowly lifted the cloth. Silence. The musicians stopped playing. Children stopped running. Even the wind seemed to pause. Standing before them was the most breathtaking sculpture anyone had ever seen. It wasn't merely beautiful, it was alive. Every strand of hair, every gentle curve of her smile, every trace of quiet strength had been carved with impossible tenderness. It was Gifty. Not the frightened orphan who had fled through the forest, not the broken girl who believed she was unwanted. This Gifty stood with quiet confidence, her head lifted, her eyes filled with hope. One hand rested gently over her heart. The other held a single little wooden bird, the very first bird she had ever carved. Imperfect, crooked, loved. Tears filled Gifty's eyes. She slowly walked closer, unable to breathe, unable to speak. It wasn't the sculpture that broke her heart. It was the way Daniel had seen her, not as she had been, as she truly was. Lucy began crying openly. Agatha lowered her head. Allie quietly reached for Gifty's hand. This time, Gifty held it warmly, not because the past had disappeared, because forgiveness had begun. The mayor noticed another inscription hidden beneath the base. He knelt, brushed away the wood shavings, then slowly read aloud. The world saw a pause, an orphan, Another pause. I saw, his voice caught, a daughter. The crowd fell silent. He continued. A friend. Long silence. And the bravest woman. His eyes filled with tears I have ever known. No one moved, no applause, no whispers, only tears, because every person there realized Daniel had spent weeks carving not what Gifty looked like, but what she had become. Then Gifty noticed something. On the back, almost hidden beneath the sculpture, was one final carving. Small enough that only she could see it. 3 simple words. Thank you for staying. She covered her mouth. The tears came freely now, because she finally understood. The portrait was never Daniel's masterpiece. She was. She turned suddenly, looking through the crowd, searching. Daniel wasn't there. Of course, he wasn't there. She smiled through her tears, then quietly whispered, "You impossible man." And before anyone could stop her, she began running, not away from something, toward someone. The whole town watched, confused. Gifty ran through the marketplace, across the little bridge, beyond the last house, into the forest, the same forest she had once entered, terrified and alone. This time, she was smiling. She reached the little house, breathless. Daniel was exactly where she knew he would be, sitting quietly on the porch, sharpening one of his carving knives. He looked up, saw the tears, immediately stood. Concern filled his face. "Gifty, what's wrong?" She laughed, actually laughed. She shook her head, trying to catch her breath. "Everything." Another laugh. "Is finally right." Daniel looked puzzled. "Did they like it?" She stared at him, half laughing, half crying. "Daniel." She stepped closer. "Nobody has ever," her voice trembled, "seen me." A tear escaped. "The way you do." Silence. Daniel looked down, almost embarrassed, then quietly said, "Because," he smiled gently, "you've always been." Long pause. "Worth seeing." Neither of them noticed. Miriam watching through the window, smiling, praying, waiting, because she knew what was coming next. The sun was beginning to disappear behind the hills. Golden light rested gently upon the little house, the same house the town had feared for 20 long years. Now, children often stopped just to wave. Travelers admired the flowers. Neighbors no longer hurried past. Nothing about the house had changed, only the hearts of the people who passed it. Daniel and Gifty sat quietly on the old porch. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. Some silences are conversations. The white horse grazed peacefully nearby. The old German shepherd slept soundly at Daniel's feet. From inside the house came the gentle sound of Miriam humming one of the old songs she had loved since she was a little girl. Gifty smiled. "She's happy." Daniel looked toward the window. A warmth filled his eyes. "She is." A long silence followed. Then Daniel quietly added, "So am I." The words surprised even him. He had not planned to say them. Gifty looked at him, really looked at him. The man who had once spoken only when necessary was now quietly sharing his heart. She smiled. "I'm glad," Daniel nodded, then looked toward the valley. "I forgot," he smiled softly, "what happiness sounded like." Gifty laughed gently. "It sounds a little like your workshop." Daniel frowned playfully. "My workshop?" "Yes," she grinned. "Mostly because someone in there," she pointed toward him, "laughs much more than he used to." Daniel shook his head, trying very hard to look serious. He failed. Just then, Miriam opened the front door. She stepped onto the porch slowly. Daniel immediately stood, offered his arm. She accepted it. Together, they walked toward the great oak tree. The three of them sat beneath its branches. The evening breeze moved softly through the leaves. For a long while, no one spoke. Then Miriam quietly reached into the pocket of her shawl. She removed a tiny brass key, old, worn smooth by time. She placed it into Daniel's hand. He looked confused. "Mother," she smiled, "your father gave me that key the day we built this house." Daniel looked down at it. She continued. He said, a tear slipped gently down her cheek. "A house only becomes a home." She looked toward Gifty. "When the right person walks through its door." Silence settled over them. Miriam slowly closed Daniel's fingers around the little key. Then she looked into her son's eyes, the eyes that had carried loneliness for far too many years. She whispered, "Don't make the same mistake I almost made." Daniel frowned. "What mistake?" Miriam smiled, the kind of smile that only wisdom can wear. "Waiting too long to tell someone." She looked gently toward Gifty. "They already belong." Then, with surprising determination, Miriam stood. "I'm tired," she smiled mischievously. "You too." She looked from one to the other. "Stay." Daniel laughed softly. "Mother." She waved one hand without turning around. "That's not a request." The front door quietly closed behind her. The garden became still. Only the sound of evening birds filled the air. Daniel turned the little key over in his hand, again and again. Finally, he looked at Gifty. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Do you remember the first day you came here?" She smiled. "I'll never forget it." "You stood outside the gate." He smiled. "Convinced monsters." Together, they finished the sentence. "Don't grow flowers." They laughed, the kind of laugh shared only by people who have walked through pain together. Daniel became quiet again. He looked toward the little house, then toward the key, still resting in his hand. Finally, he stood, walked slowly to the old wooden gate, the very gate Gifty had once been too frightened to open. He unlocked it, then locked it again, testing the old key. He turned back toward her, holding it gently. His hands trembled, not from fear, from hope. He walked back, stopped in front of her, then placed the little brass key into her hand. Gifty looked down, confused. Daniel smiled, the quietest smile she had ever seen. Then he said the words that had been waiting since the very first chapter. "Gifty." A long silence. "Would you?" His voice almost disappeared. "Keep this?" She looked up. He continued, "Because..." A tear filled his eyes. "I don't ever..." He smiled through it. "Want you?" Another pause, to wonder. His fingers gently closed around hers. "Whether you belong here." Silence. Complete silence. Gifty stared at the tiny key resting in her hand. Then, slowly, she looked back at Daniel. Tears streamed down her face. She laughed softly, the same laugh that had brought life back into his workshop. Then she whispered, "Daniel." She stepped closer, placed one hand over his. "I stopped wondering." A tear escaped. "The day you opened the door." Daniel closed his eyes. Not because he was crying, because after 20 years, the weight he had carried had finally become light. Without another word, Gifty slipped the little key into the pocket of her dress. Then, for for the first time. She reached for his hand, not because she needed help, not because she was afraid, simply because it was where her hand belonged. Daniel gently held it. Neither of them spoke again. They didn't have to. Some promises are too sacred for words. Inside the house, Miriam quietly looked through the window. She smiled, folded her hands, then whispered, "One final prayer. Thank you." He found his way home. The camera slowly pulls away. The little house glows beneath the golden evening sky. The white horse grazes peacefully. The old German shepherd lifts his head, then settles back down. The oak tree sways gently. Daniel and Gifty remain seated, their hands still together. No music, only the sound of birds singing as daylight slowly fades. The end.